Now I'm going to talk about measuring some of these quantities of voltage, current and resistance, and the use of a multimeter. And I'll also start off by talking about power. Okay, in the previous little show that I did, I showed you a circuit which had a battery connected into it, and it was connected to a resistor. Let's make this resistor into a light bulb, because a light bulb offers some resistance to a circuit. As the current flows through the circuit, it flows through the small element of the bulb and it generates light, and it can often generate a bit of heat as well. So we've got our current flow. I'll just say that this is conventional current flow, by the way, it doesn't really matter. And it's flowing through the circuit here. Now, the equation that relates power to voltage and current is P is equal to V times I. Now, you might remember Ohm's law, where Ohm's law is equal to R is equal to V over I. So you can actually use these and transpose these. If you know one quantity and you don't know another, you can always mix and match a little bit. Okay, but just going back to this equation for power. So if power is equal to voltage times current, and if we've measured the current in a circuit, and let's say, just taking the previous example, let's say we've measured it to be 4 amps. We know the voltage is 12 volts, so the power is voltage times current. So that would be a 48 watt light bulb. So 48 watts is a measure of, or watts is the measure of power. Okay, so how do we measure some of these quantities? Let's say that we didn't know what the voltage is of the battery. Usually it's written on the side, but let's say we didn't know. Okay, so you could use a voltmeter. And to use a voltmeter in a circuit, you would connect one terminal across the positive side and another terminal across the negative side, or the ground side, and the symbol for a voltmeter is V in a circle. So the two wires would just go directly across the battery like that. Okay, but how do we measure the current in a circuit? Well, this is where it gets a little bit more complicated, because you can't just measure across, unfortunately. And the way to do this is to break the wire. So you have your wire going into your light bulb like this, and you have your return. Okay, and in order to measure the current, it's a bit like measuring the current in a stream, river current. You have to put your hand into the stream to get a feel for what the current is. But in this case, you have to put your meter into the current of the circuit, and A for amps. So then the current will flow through the ammeter. And the ammeter is the name of a device which would be measuring current, so it has to flow through it. If you try and measure across, then you're going to make some sort of short circuit. And the reason why is when you've got your ammeter connected, it acts like an extremely low resistance. So you could almost say that the resistance is more or less equal to 0 ohms, because it allows very little inhibition to the current to flow. Otherwise it would be affecting the current. So it's almost like a short circuit. So if you connected that across your circuit, then you'd be making a short circuit. So I have a meter here. Okay, so this is a multimeter, and you'll see that on this meter we've got dials like so. Now, on the dials we've got several different connections. We've got DC voltage, so it can measure up to 200 millivolts, up to 2 volts, up to 20 volts, up to 200 volts, and up to 1000 volts. So you can just flick this to whichever range you're going to measure. Usually the 20 volt range will be the best for measuring the usual batteries and car batteries, etc. Anything up to 20 volts. So this value here is the absolute maximum value that it will read. So if you try and measure something that's 21 volts, then this won't do. You'd have to move it onto the next scale. Likewise, anything bigger than 2 volts, then this scale would not be good. So anything smaller, 1.5 volts, for example, that would be fine. Okay, well, we also have AC voltage if we wanted to measure fluctuating voltage, and that would be the selection in this range here. But for most applications, we're measuring DC voltage. What we also have is a resistance measure. So we can measure resistance. It's got the ohm symbol here. And what you need to do really is to estimate what is the value of the resistance that you're going to measure. And if you're not sure, well, you can always start off at the high range, and it might read 0, 0 because the scale won't be very accurate. And then you can work your way down until you've got a decent reading. So this will read up to 2 kilo ohms. This will read up to 20 kilo ohms. This will read up to 20 mega ohms. And this one will read up to 200 ohms. Now the other one that I wanted to show you is this will also measure current. So this will measure current in the milliamp range. So this will measure up to 20 milliamps, 200 milliamps, and 2 milliamps. So you have an estimate which value you're going to measure. Now, if you're measuring voltage, then you have your cables connected so you have your ground connection and you have your positive into the symbol where it says V. It also says some other things like hertz and ohms, so you would use that if you're measuring frequency in hertz or if you're measuring ohms resistance. If you're measuring current, however, you have to decide, am I going to be measuring milliamps, so 1,000th of an amp, or am I going to be measuring in the amps scale? Usually in vehicle electrics, we're measuring values in the amps range. So you would have to change the connections like so. And then you would make sure that you've connected your circuit, so you'd have your positive probe and your negative probe, and they would be measuring the current going through the circuit, just like I showed in the diagram there. So in this case, you would have your negative probe here, your positive probe here, and then the current is going through the ammeter to show you what the current reading is. If you're measuring voltage, then you would move the input into that one, change it to the range of the voltage that you're going to measure. I've put 20 volts on this one, and then you would connect your probes like so. So then you'd be measuring the voltage across that.